Madrid had a way of making mornings feel borrowed. Light slipped between the narrow buildings and settled softly on the balcony rail, warming my coffee cup before it ever reached my hands. Somewhere below, a scooter buzzed past and a woman laughed in a language I was still learning to hear without translating. I stood there longer than necessary, breathing in the smell of toasted bread and distant traffic, letting the city remind me that I was far from home. My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 32 years old. I'd come to Spain for work officially. A short consulting project, 3 weeks, clean and contained. Unofficially, I needed distance, the kind that makes patterns easier to see. When you're inside something, it just feels like weather. When you step away, it starts to look like design. My phone buzzed while I watched the street wake up. A family group chat notification. I didn't open it right away. I'd learned that urgency often disguises entitlement. I've always been the reliable one. The one who answers calls no matter the time zone. The one who keeps documents organized, bills paid, problems quiet. Reliability, I learned early, made people comfortable asking for more. I finally tapped the message. A photo loaded slowly. My parents stood in front of my house. My house. Smiling with the pride of people convinced they'd just solved a problem. My sister was there too, keys lifted between her fingers like proof. All set, my mother had typed. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. I stared at the screen until the words flattened into shapes. A memory drifted in, uninvited. Me at 17, standing in that same driveway while my parents discussed temporary arrangements that always seemed to last longer than promised. I'd learned then that worry in my family was a euphemism for control. I didn't reply. Instead, I set my phone face down on the small cafe table and listened to Madrid breathe. Cups clinked. Chairs scraped. A waiter called out an order. The world continued, indifferent to the drama unfolding across an ocean. They thought they were taking control. That part almost made me smile. 2 weeks earlier, before I ever boarded a plane, I'd signed papers in a quiet office that smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. The realtor had slid the documents across the desk with professional neutrality. Once this goes through, she'd said, it's done. It was done. The house had sold quickly. Clean offer. No complications. I'd chosen a closing date that gave me time to leave town without theatrics. No announcements. No negotiations. Just action. I've always been the reliable one. Reliable people plan exits without applause. Back in Madrid, my phone buzzed again. This time a call from my sister. I let it ring. Then again. And again. The 4th time I answered. What did you do? She demanded, skipping hello. I went on a business trip, I said calmly. That's not funny, she snapped. Mom gave me the keys. The locks don't work. The alarm. The alarm isn't yours, I said. Neither is the house. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. What are you talking about? I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the cafe, the scrape of a chair leg on tile. I sold it, I said. 2 weeks ago. She laughed once, brittle. You can't just do that. I can, I replied. And I did. The line went quiet again, this time heavier. Somewhere in the background, my mother's voice rose, demanding the phone. Evelyn, she said, clipped and furious, this isn't how families handle things. I leaned back in my chair and looked up at the bright Madrid sky. You're right, I said. Families ask. Pause. Then colder, you knew we were planning something. Yes, I said. That's why I finished mine first. I hung up before the argument could bloom. Not out of anger, out of clarity. The plan they'd built depended on my predictability, on my silence, on the belief that being the reliable one meant I'd always be reachable. I paid my bill and stepped back into the street, the sun sharp on my face. Somewhere far away, keys sat useless in my sister's hand, opening nothing. And for the first time in a long while, distance didn't feel like escape. Felt like timing. The calls didn't stop after that. They came in waves, timed poorly across time zones, each ring vibrating against cafe tables and hotel nightstands like an accusation. I let most of them go unanswered. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. I needed to hear my own thoughts without their voices rearranging them. I've always been the reliable one. Reliability teaches people to panic when you stop responding. Madrid blurred past me in pieces. Meetings in glass-walled offices. Long walks after sunset when the air cooled and the city softened. The smell of orange blossoms near Retiro Park. The echo of footsteps in stone corridors older than my country. Distance did something important. It slowed everything down enough for me to feel what I'd been outrunning. A message finally landed that wasn't angry. My father. We need to talk. I stared at the words while sitting on a bench overlooking the river, sunlight breaking into ripples. Need was his favorite word. Need implied urgency. Need implied authority. I typed back one sentence. You needed to ask before handing out my keys. Minutes passed. Then a reply. We were protecting you. That one almost hurt. A memory surfaced. Me at 25 standing in the kitchen while my parents insisted on co-signing something I could afford on my own. Just in case, they'd said. Protection had always come with strings. Oversight disguised as care. I stood and started walking, phone still in my hand. Protection doesn't require secrecy, I typed. Control does. No response. Instead, my sister sent a photo. The front door of my old house. A new lock installed. A handwritten note taped crookedly to the frame. Call the owner. I laughed then, quietly, unexpectedly. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity had finally tipped into clarity. They'd believed possession was permanent. That proximity equaled permission. That my life paused when theirs demanded it. I've always been the reliable one. Reliable people are often mistaken for predictable. That evening I met with a colleague for dinner. We talked about work, about a project that might extend my stay. He asked how my family was, casually, the way people do when they don't expect a real answer. They're adjusting, I said. Felt true. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop and reviewed the sale documents again. The transfer date. The signatures. The finality. Everything clean. Irreversible. I forwarded one email, just one, to my parents and sister. The confirmation of sale. No commentary. The reply came from my mother almost immediately. You blindsided us. I stared at the screen, then typed slowly. You planned without me. Pause. Then another message. You didn't have to humiliate your sister. I closed the laptop. Humiliation requires an audience. I hadn't invited one. Consequences had simply arrived where assumptions once lived. Later that night, lying in the dark, jet lag tugging at my thoughts, I realized something unsettling. They weren't angry about the house. Not really. They were angry because the rules had changed without their consent. I'd always been the one they planned around. The fixed point. The resource that didn't move. I wasn't that anymore. The next morning I woke to a voicemail from my father. His voice was quieter than usual, strained. We didn't know you felt this way, he said. We thought you trusted us. I listened once. Then again. Trust. Another word that had been used like a one-way street. I didn't call back. Instead, I went out early, bought a coffee I didn't recognize, and stood on the balcony watching the city wake again. The rhythm of Madrid felt steadier now, less borrowed. I wasn't hiding. I was living somewhere my family couldn't rearrange. I've always been the reliable one. But reliability doesn't mean surrender. By the time I headed to my morning meeting, my phone was quiet again. Not peaceful, processing. Somewhere across the ocean, keys sat useless, plans dismantled by paperwork and timing. They were learning what it felt like to reach for control and find nothing there. And I was learning something too. Reliability isn't about being available. It's about being accountable, to yourself first. The distance between us wasn't measured in miles anymore. It was measured in understanding. The shock didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, like weather changing while you're indoors. I could tell because the messages shifted. The anger dulled into logistics. Questions replaced accusations. My parents wanted to know who the new owner was. My sister asked if the sale could be reversed. My aunt suggested a family meeting when you get back, as if back was a place I was already packing to return to. I didn't answer most of it. I've always been the reliable one. Reliable people are expected to explain themselves until everyone else feels settled. Madrid stopped feeling temporary. I found a rhythm that didn't include checking my phone every few minutes. Morning walks past the same bakery. Late dinners that stretched without urgency. I realized how rarely I'd allowed myself to exist without being on standby. One afternoon, during a break between meetings, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was the new homeowner. I wanted to let you know, he said politely, your family came by again. They were surprised. I closed my eyes. Did they cause trouble? No, he said. But they seemed confused. They insisted the house was still yours. I exhaled slowly. It isn't. He paused. We changed the locks. Installed new cameras. Just wanted to reassure you. Thank you, I said. And I'm sorry. You don't need to be, he replied. It's very clear who owns the place. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Clear ownership. Clear boundaries. Clear endings. A memory drifted in, me at 14, overhearing my parents promise my sister she could always fall back on what I built. I'd thought they meant emotionally. I understood now they'd meant materially. That night my father sent a long message. Not angry. Reflective. Dangerous in its softness. We never meant to hurt you. We thought you'd appreciate having us handle things while you were away. You've always been so capable. Capable. Another word that had been weaponized into expectation. I typed a reply then deleted it. Typed again. Being capable doesn't mean being replaceable, I finally sent. No response came. Instead my sister called again. This time she sounded smaller. What are we supposed to do now? She asked. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed, suitcase still half unpacked even weeks in. Do about what? The house, she said. Mom promised. I know what Mom promised, I interrupted gently. She didn't have the right. Silence stretched. Then sharper. You didn't have to do it like this. I thought about that. About timing. About secrecy. About how often I'd been told there was a right way to assert myself, as long as it didn't inconvenience anyone else. I did, I said finally. Because any other way would have been undone. She hung up without saying goodbye. I've always been the reliable one. And reliability, I learned, makes people assume permanence. By the end of the week, the story had solidified back home. The house was gone. The plan had failed. There was nothing left to negotiate. That was when the guilt arrived. External, persistent, dressed as concern. A cousin texted, family should stick together. An aunt emailed, this feels extreme. A family friend wrote, your parents are devastated. I read each message once and didn't respond. Devastation implies loss. What they'd lost was access. On my last evening in Madrid, I stood on the balcony again, the city glowing softly below. I realized something unsettling and freeing at the same time. They weren't mourning the house. They were mourning the version of me who would have handed it over. I'd always believed reliability meant showing up no matter the cost. Now I understood it could also mean showing up for myself when no one else would. I didn't know what would happen when I returned home. I didn't know how long the silence would last or what shape it would eventually take. What I did know was this. They'd made their move assuming I'd stay still. And once you move out of that role, everything built around it collapses quietly. The plan was over. They just hadn't accepted it yet. I flew home on a gray morning that felt intentionally subdued, like the sky understood what kind of arrival this would be. The airport smelled of burnt coffee and recycled air. Suitcases rolled past me in uneven rhythms, wheels clicking over tile like punctuation. I moved through it all quietly, not hiding, just uninterested in spectacle. I didn't go straight to my parents' house. I didn't need to. Instead, I drove past my old street. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Fresh paint on the trim. New curtains in the front window. A different car in the driveway. Ordinary signs of a life that wasn't mine anymore. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, engine off, letting the finality settle. I've always been the reliable one. Reliable enough to know when closure doesn't require confrontation. My phone buzzed once. A message from my father. We should talk. I didn't answer. Not yet. I went home, to the place I lived now, the one no one else had keys to. I unpacked slowly, folding clothes with care, grounding myself in the simple proof that I was back on my own terms. The house held my silence without demanding anything from it. That evening my sister showed up. No warning. No call. Just a knock that carried years of entitlement in its rhythm. I opened the door and didn't step aside. We stood there, the porch light casting her face in harsh clarity. You really sold it, she said, like she was still hoping I'd deny it. Yes, I replied. She crossed her arms. Mom hasn't slept. I waited. You could have told us, she continued. We wouldn't have. You would have tried to stop me, I said calmly. She flinched. Not because it was cruel but because it was accurate. Dad says you've changed, she said. I nodded. I hope so. For a moment she looked like she might cry. Then she straightened, defaulting to defensiveness. Family doesn't do things like this. Families also don't hand out keys to houses they don't own, I said. That ended the conversation. She left without another word. No apology. No resolution. Just the sound of footsteps retreating down the porch steps, slower than they'd arrived. Later that night I finally called my father. His voice was tired. We thought we were helping, he said. I know, I replied. But help that ignores consent isn't help. Silence stretched between us. Not hostile. Evaluative. You've always been the one we could count on, he said quietly. I closed my eyes. That's exactly why this happened. I've always been the reliable one. And reliability, unchecked, teaches people they can plan without you. We didn't reconcile that night. We didn't need to. Something more important happened instead. The rules were spoken out loud, finally, where everyone could hear them. I hung up and sat alone in the living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant scrape of leaves outside. Ordinary sounds. Safe ones. If you've ever been the one everyone relies on but no one asks, you know how strange it feels to stop being predictable. Some families don't miss you, they miss the access. I didn't take anything from them. I didn't embarrass anyone. I didn't spring a trap for pleasure. I stepped out of a role that no longer fit. The house was gone. The plan was over. And the shock they felt wasn't about loss. It was about realizing they couldn't reach into my life without permission anymore. I turned off the lights and walked down the hallway, my footsteps steady, unhurried. For the first time, being the reliable one didn't mean being available. It meant being aligned. And that was enough. Control ends when you move.